Just a quick question here from Horatio wants to know what it means when the PBOC sets the US dollar Chinese yuan midpoint and why it matters for us as traders. As always, thanks for the question, Horatio. So looking at the midpoint setting, it's important to remember that a currency pair like the US dollar versus the Chinese yuan doesn't have a free floating exchange rate like something like the euro US dollar or the pound US dollar, etc. And that is because the PBOC, or the People's Bank of China, keeps a very strict control of the currency's rate. So every day, the PBOC will basically set a midpoint for the yuan versus the US dollar, and the bank will allow the currency to trade within a 2% range above and below that specific midpoint level. Now, generally speaking, a much lower midpoint setting is considered as a more positive risk input, and a much higher setting is considered as a more risk negative input. Now, a key level to watch for the pair is the $7 level, which did see lots of market reactions in terms of risk flows going back to 2019, when China basically deliberately weakened their currency to push the exchange rate above that $7 level for the first time since the global financial crisis. And they did that to basically push back against the tariffs imposed on China by the US. Now, the markets were interpreting the higher fixing above that $7 level as China's way of trying to offset the impact of the US tariffs. And to be fair, to a large extent, it did work. However, as you would expect, the Chinese government did deny that they devalued the currency on purpose in order to basically offset the impact from the tariffs, and rather insisted that it was due to just normal fundamental reasons. Now, as a result of the weakening of their currency, the US in 2009 did designate China as a currency manipulator. But that decision was, of course, reversed, I think, in early January this year, in a sign of good faith towards China before the signing of the Phase 1 trade deal. Now, keep in mind that even though the midpoint fixing is an important point to watch, it might be less and more important depending on US and China trade relations. So if we have just during a normal risk of flight, for example, and a massive global economic crisis like we're going through now, one would expect the dollar to appreciate against the yuan as an emerging market currency, as it does against most other emerging market currencies. So the context of why it's rising is also an important consideration. Now, with tensions recently turning more negative, with that negative rhetoric starting to pick back up against the two countries due to the coronavirus, that midpoint will become back into focus as the situation starts to intensify between the two countries. So to sum it up, yes, the midpoint is important, but it might be more and less important depending on whether it's a key focus point for the markets at that particular time.